Welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. I'm Deb Hackathorn. I'm a member of CMC's Board of Trustees, and during the day, I do state government affairs for the law firm Frost Brown Todd. CMC welcomes everyone. Today's forum, MORPC Rickenbacker Area Study, is sponsored today by the Columbus Regional Airport Authority and presented in partnership with MORPC. Each are represented here by many friends and associates. Please help me in thanking them for their sponsorship. As you probably know, Rickenbacker is home to a cargo-only airport, a rail intermodal yard, and over 75 million square feet of industrial and distribution space that employs over 24,000 people. Today's Rickenbacker Area Study is a community-driven study that provides recommendations to position the area as a complete community, as well as a successful international logistics hub. Why? Well, we're going to find out today. Our experts, please join me in welcoming our experts. Assistant Administrator of Groveport, Ohio, Jeff Green. Director of Economic Development and Planning for Franklin County, Jim Schimmer. Chief Commercial Officer for the Columbus Regional Airport Authority, Shannetta Griffin. And finally, our host for today, MORPC's Transportation and Infrastructure Director, Thea Walsh. Thea, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Deb. So first, I would like to just take you back to whenever Rickenbacker started, or what we know now as the Rickenbacker area. In 1942, it was known as Lockbourne Army Base, and it opened at that time. And during that time, it was the home of the Women Air Force Services Pilots, or the WASPs. It is also the final home of the Tuskegee Airmen, the only all-black unit of the U.S. Air Force, and eventually was renamed after Eddie Rickenbacker, America's most successful fighter ace of World War I. But sadly, during a realignment in 1978, the Rickenbacker Air Force Base begins to be realigned and not going to be a base anymore. And about 12,000 people around that time lost their jobs in Franklin County, and it really shocked Central Ohio, the economy. And at that time, the Franklin County Commissioners created the Rickenbacker Port Authority. 1979, and then later established a foreign trade zone in 1987, foreign trade zone number 138, established under the control of the Rickenbacker Port Authority. Angie Atwood, working with you all the time, and yeah, thank you for your management of that. Rickenbacker Inland Port concept developed and marketed in 1990, and then in 2003, Columbus Regional Airport Authority stepped in and merged with the Rickenbacker Port Authority, and it is under that management we know today. Since 1992, the Franklin County Commissioners have dedicated approximately $130 million in this asset in Central Ohio, and I'm sure whenever you consider just beyond that with the city of Columbus and all the communities that are out there, how much it's uncounted, how much has been put into this resource. And I know for the Franklin County Commissioners, their revenues actually count on sales tax. So for them to do that, that's a big deal because you're not selling a lot out there, you're creating. And so this is today quite an investment and a way to attract economic development. And we are really truly starting to see the economic engine of our region and these substantial growth years that they're having. So I want to just share with you a little bit of that's the history, and now talk to you a little bit about why it's so important we plan for the future. So in the 1990s, MORPC first stepped in to assist local leaders in planning for the transportation movement around the Rickenbacker area, and then later in the 2007, we did the same. And from those opportunities, we then learned that we need to be more comprehensive. And so here in the last year, we've been able to focus a little more on not just transportation, but workforce and freight, economic development, housing, utilities, energy, and quality of life out there in our new plan. And I urge you to check out our plan, our study of that area on our website at MORPC.org. And if you have your device, just go ahead and get it out and flip through it. I think you'll be really impressed with it. It's a story map format, and there's a great team at MORPC that worked on it, led by Dina Lopez right over here. So thank you for all your hard work, Dina. But now I'm going to go ahead and share around the questions, because I know I don't have a lot of time to go on and on about the plan, but we have a number of folks who helped us with this plan sitting up here. We had countless meetings out at OBETS and at MORPC with various members here on the stage. And so first I'm going to start with Jim to talk about the plan. So Jim, knock knock.
Who's there?
Chew.
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 E.
Who?
Chew.
Are you pretending to be a train? You didn't do it right. That's all right.
Big surprise
right.
there, Thea. Right?
I have to trip him with a corny joke so that he doesn't trump me with one later. Then I'm relaxed. Okay, so today, Rickenbacker is a logistics hub with a cargo-focused airport, rail intermodal facility, and easy highway access, but is also a major job center and unique part of our region. So Jim, how important is the Central Ohio economy, or is this asset to the Central Ohio economy for both from a general sense and also from your economic developer hat?
Well, I'll answer that in just a second. I just wanted to say one thing, a couple things actually, immediately going off script. And that's just that, I asked my dad one time, I said, Dad, I got this big presentation to do, and what do you suggest for me? And he said, it's pretty simple. Just don't make an ass out of yourself. I have been doing that for a long time, not heeding my own father's advice. But what I will say is that it's so great to be sitting up here today and looking out at the audience. And I hope you all have the opportunity in your own field and profession to be able to have this moment in time where you can talk to people about something you're really passionate about. And Rickenbacker is one of those things that has been a passion of mine for a number of years, and has been something that I think it should be a passion of all of ours. Think about it for a second. We're talking about a facility. If you could imagine one facility in Central Ohio and Franklin County that employs over 15,000 people in one place. And I bet you a lot of people in this room have never been down there, or let alone been inside a 1 million square foot warehouse to see how huge that is. And that's one of the things that's so great about our community in a way, is that Columbus is small as it is big as it can be, has those places that you don't really ever see or don't really recognize and understand. And what the CMC does, I think in such a great way, is to bring that opportunity and make this town a little smaller and a little more realistic. And it's really like having a conversation in your living room. So that's where I'm coming from today, is that I'm not going to be profound in any way, shape, or form, but I will tell you that there are a number of things here that are really terrific. And this is an area that I know a little bit about, but there are so many more of you in this audience, including my own staff, who know far more about this place than I do, and the city staff, my colleagues at the city. But the thing is that this is an asset, and it is an important thing that we really need to keep in mind, because it happens only here. This is a cargo dedicated airport surrounded by a logistics facility that has over 80 million square feet of space, and you only find that here in Central Ohio. The question is, and this will be the thing that I think we need to be considering as we move forward, is how do we position that asset to become a long-term return for us? And it's been an amazing process in a lot of ways. And I think one of the things I'll say is that there's over $880 million worth of payroll that's generated out of that facility. So when I think sometimes, I'm looking at Commissioner Brown right now, about why the Franklin County Commissioners got involved in spending, and I'll just estimate the number of maybe $130 million. And remember, folks, we're sales tax based. putting that money into Rickenbacker isn't going to return a whole bunch of sales tax. But those commissioners woke up one morning and found out that they had 12,000 people who were going to be out of a job. And that got their attention. And I think as you move forward in time, the creation of the Rickenbacker Port Authority is something that a lot of people maybe in this room remember, but I will say that there were people like Al Icavone and John Rosenberger, and a whole host of folks that were involved in that organization that really made Rickenbacker happen. And as time has gone past, one of the things is sometimes those people are forgotten. I will say to you is that in this community, one of the things we're going to have is, you're going to create boards and you're going to create different groups. One of the ones I think coming online here in the next few months and year will be for Crew Stadium, and the idea of creating a type of organization that may be around for 30 years. It's important, and it's good work that needs to be done, but it doesn't happen overnight, and I'm going to be quiet after that.
Thanks. Well, another great partner out in the Rickenbacker area is certainly the CRAA. And Shannetta, first, congratulations. I hear you have a promotion. Way to go, girl.
Thank
so, you want to tell us a little bit about it?
Well, I'm a week or so into it, so still learning, but very excited to be on the side of the airport in regards to revenue and working with our partners, both community partners, airlines, concessionaires, and really looking at how we're going to move the airport forward, not only Rickenbacker, but CMH and Bolton Field as well. So very excited about it. Thank you for that, Thea.
Well, I know from working with you on this study that we're in good hands for sure. So Rickenbacker Airport is obviously a key asset of the area, and we've seen it grow tremendously in the last several years under CRA's leadership. As we worked on the study, we also worked with CRAA on a study they were doing. Basically, we referred to it as inside the fence, right? So how do the two planning efforts really work together? Could you tell us a little bit more about what you guys were doing in your planning efforts and how we're going to make that all work?
I will, and so I'm going to go a little bit off script as well, too, because I do want to thank the Columbus Metropolitan Club for bringing the airport and MORPC together here to talk about this plan and talk about these efforts, because this is an important conversation that won't end today as we take these plans and we actually make them reality. So our master planning effort, which is a long-term plan that the airport does in regards to the requirements of the Federal Aviation Administration, which is our oversight body, really looks at how we will operate internally within the airport, looking at all of our land, looking at our facilities. So the collaboration that we had with MORPC in regards to looking at this, not just with the airport, but holistically in the community, aligned us very well. So very good conversation, very good collaboration, really looking at all of the transportation systems, the housing, the jobs, the recreation pieces. I was just talking with someone about bike trails. All of that becomes important to the growth of this community, and the airport certainly is a partner and excited to be at the table to have those conversations, because we are a strong economic driver, as you heard Jim kind of give some of those numbers in regards to the impact that are coming out of the Rickenbacker Airport. So when we think about the logistics and all the things that we talked about in the plans, the airport certainly has to look at how are we going to handle that type of capacity. So when we think about what our master plan said, that potentially 900% growth in cargo, we have to look at cargo facilities. Where will those be? Partners that will work with us in regards to being able to look at new facilities and enhancing the ones that we have. But most importantly, as this cargo is coming either internationally or domestically, the aircrafts that are being used are much larger. So we have to look at, make sure that our airfield, both from size capacity and the ability to be able to handle those large aircrafts, that we're finding revenue sources, we're finding different ways of which we can make sure that that airfield is up to par. So again, looking at the land use and all the conversation from our master plan and MORPC, we have to be a sustainably driven economic partner, and that's looking at all three legs of sustainability. Some from financial stability, making sure that the airport stays financially stable in this community, but then environmental stewardship. What are we doing to make sure that we're helping with the environment and watching out for all of the community partners that we have there? there. And then the last piece of that is the community impact. So being a good partner, being at the table, helping to make the decisions that are coming out of both the plans. So yeah, there's a lot of growth that's been going on there, and again, as we've heard those numbers, but there's a lot more opportunity, and the two plans together will help us to align that in a strategic way.
Awesome. Thank you, Shannetta.
And can I interrupt?
Of course.
We'll do that. This falls under this concept of prepared communities win. You hear that come out of Columbus 2020 quite a bit. And the idea is you better be ready for people to come to your community and want to put money into it. And I think in some ways, the Jeff and what's happened down in Groveport is such a great example of that. But in this instance, two different studies, inside the fence, outside the fence, they come together. We're more prepared. We're going to be better off going forward.
Thanks, Jim. And so I couldn't have said that better. You talk about some prepared communities. We really got a chance to work with Obetz and Groveport and Lockbourne and some of the townships down there, and how these, I first started at MORPC, actually one of my very first visits with our executive director, William, he goes out and meets with each one of our members, was with Groveport and with Jeff. And, I learned on that day to never underestimate a small community and their abilities in economic development. And they prove it time and time again. So one of the things that I am most impressed with and that I learned from watching both projects in this area, but also from the study, is how these communities work together down there. And so how do the residents and leaders of Groveport view this asset? And then how do you work with the communities of those other communities to really leverage that?
Well, first of all, you have to understand that a lot of the residents of the community and some of the leaders of the community are there because of the Air Force Base. Personally, part of my staff, their parents were career military, and they ended up at Rickenbacker. So a lot of the people in the community have been a part of that resource, and now they've been a part of the evolution of that resource into something that's truly a resource for the community, because for a long time it was a resource for the United States. It was an Air Force base that was surrounded by cornfields. And it was actually those cornfields that led probably to a lot of our growth. Yeah. I always think it's interesting when I look at the city of Groveport, and Lockbourne is much the same. So much of the fortunes of the community have been tied to transportation from the founding. As ports along the Ohio Erie Canal. And I think it's interesting to look at where most of our industrial growth has occurred has been along the corridor that used to be that Ohio Erie Canal. So we've always had we've always been affected by transportation. I was hired in 2001 as a development director, and in my interview, a lot of what I heard was that development was happening. Starting in 1995, when Eddie Bauer came into the community with a little over 1 million square foot warehouse, which we had never seen a building that size. I grew up in a town that size. That's grown to about 2.2 million square feet right now. That was followed very quickly because of the availability of land by a lot more development. When I came on board, we had probably about 6 million square foot under roof. We now have about 23 million square feet under roof. A lot of my job was to promote development, but probably more importantly was to guide development and to control development so that we became beneficiaries of that development and not victims of the development. I think we've all seen examples of that where the community becomes swallowed. The community, as my mother would say, knows which side the bread is buttered on. We know that resource that is Rickenbacker and the growth that's occurred around Rickenbacker has allowed us to provide a quality of life for our residents that is unparalleled in communities our size. We're a little over 5,500 people, but we have a 67,000 square foot recreation center with an indoor aquatic center, a 450,000 gallon outdoor aquatic park. We own our own golf course. We have a very pristine Main Street that has been paid for largely through our own tax base. These are things that our community understands and is aware of and is very grateful for, and we've been able to channel that. And I think it's fortunate that so much of this growth has occurred across the physical boundaries so that we actually have two Groveports. We have what's happened in the industrial parks across 317 and what's happened within the community. And it's remained a very pristine, very hometown little community. So they always look at the assets as an asset to the city, and how can we convert that into assets for us and to promote the quality of life for our residents. I think we've been very successful at it. I will say, though, to some extent, at 22, 23 million square feet, we're at a point where we're almost out of land. And the community is starting to experience a little bit of what I'd call warehouse fatigue, where the development keeps coming and it keeps coming. And right now with the economy, what it is, it just keeps coming. And for the first time, we're starting to see a little bit of pushback. You know, why can't we get more restaurants? Why can't we get more retail? Why can't we get more things? And these are things that actually we're hearing from the residents of our industrial park as well. Why can't we get more restaurants? Well, you keep taking all the land. So we're hearing a little bit of that, and we're trying to find that balance. But it's important, and the community understands how important that is. The leaders of the community, I will say, understand how important that is. Residents, we have to kind of keep telling them, hey, you know, your taxes are what they are because these big boxes are paying the bulk of it. As far as how we collaborate, I think it's important to understand that at the end of the day, we also compete. So within the Rickenbacker area, we have communities that have available land, that have available buildings, so we'll always compete. I think the key is to find ways that we can collaborate, though, because Obet's success, Lockbourne's success, Columbus's success is our success. And I think Jim probably did a lot in this regard. Years ago, we started what we call the Rickenbacker Working Group, for lack of a better term. And we would get together about once a month just to talk about issues that were common to us within that region. And if we accomplish nothing more than just to have that conversation and just to stay in front of each other, to know that, you know, we're all in this together as a subset of the larger market, I think it was very important. And Jim, I want to get back to that. I think that's something that's very important, because over time you're looking out for your own best interests. And we will continue to look out for our own best interests, but I think we can do that in league with the other communities. A couple of the ways we have, and we'll talk a little bit more about transportation. I know one of the questions you want to ask coming up is about transportation within the city, but that's one of the areas that we collaborate with the other communities. And then secondly, one of the issues we're working on right now, one of the projects we're working on, is a fiber network. Unbelievable that in this day and age, and with the amount of growth that we've had in Rickenbacker, there doesn't exist that resource in Rickenbacker to a degree that everybody can take advantage of it. So we're now working with the village of Obetz and Columbus to some extent to look at the fiber network and how this works.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, so that leads right into the advancement of a new part of our focus of industry, and that is on being connected and being ahead of times with your technology and being sustainable, which is one thing that you mentioned, Shannetta. So Jim, early on in this study, like when we first drafted the scope for it, you came back to me, you're like, no, we've got to have solar panels, and they have to be able to generate all their own electricity out there. And so tell me, I mean, we did a lot of studying on the energy out there, and we also did a Franklin County energy study during that same time at MORPC. So talk to me a little bit about your vision, and then, you know, where we went from there.
Well, you'll all be happy to know that for those of you who do know me, I had an intervention. So. Okay. And it didn't work, because I'm still going to Jesus. I'm still going to talk about it. You know, really, if you can imagine this, and this is sort of the general overall concept of what I was trying to get at, is it really positioned Rickenbacker as a cutting-edge 21st century international logistics operation that had a specific focus on reducing the industry's carbon footprint while generating power from specific alternative energy systems and helping provide electronic data storage and infrastructure to enhance business development. That's kind of the big, picture. Get your mind around that. The idea that Rickenbacker has, give or take, 80 million square feet, and there's not a solar panel on any of the rooftops down there, puzzles me. However, this intervention that I'm talking about that came through our own strategic planning process that we had this year, one of the, Ellen Harpel, excuse me, is the woman who was one of the consultants on the team, and she said to me, Jim, you know, you've been pushing about it, and I know that you went to Business First, and you talked about it in Business First. You know, why isn't the private sector responding to this idea of this alternative energy zone? Sure, it's got all the land, and it's got, you know, warehouse and Swaco's nearby, and they can produce, you know, landfill gas and everything. The problem is you do not have a private sector market who is responding. Right. Government can have great ideas, right? And we have limited dollars to put into things like this. If the market isn't there, it's not going to happen. And so my challenge, and my challenge to all of you, and is going to continue to be as long as I'm around, is to figure out how we make this place a better place than a monoculture of just warehousing. I think we can generate power there. I think we have the ability to look at advanced logistics items, whether it's you know, alternative vehicles that move stuff around that are electric and they're not diesel, because the logistics industry has the big burden of fossil fuels associated with it. It can do better, we can do better, and in that process we can advance our entire Central Ohio area in a new era.
Right, thanks. So you actually hit on something I was going to ask Shannetta about anyway, and so let's just kind of keep that conversation going. You talked about the diversification of industries, not just the types of ways to maintain the facilities there, but also who's actually doing the work out there. How important is that to the CRAA, and that you not just have one type of industry and just a bunch of warehouses?
Well, diversification is very important, especially from an economic standpoint. When you think about just being able to maintain, and again, back to this word of being sustainable, in a time where we know there's going to be an economic downturn. So what does that look like? So the airport certainly has been active in making sure that we diversify everything around cargo, and looking at different markets and different source providers. Either it's through the fashion, technology, aerospace, manufacturing, all the different pieces, livestock, aerospace, as I mentioned, pharma, e-commerce. All of these areas of diversification are very important, and a lot of that diversification is happening and going through our FTZ. So again, we know that that's important for the airport to be sustainable, but as we again tie back this plan of looking at land use, and when businesses are making those types of decisions, being able to have those types of amenities of transportation, recreation, jobs, housing will be important for those companies to make that type of decision. So again, tying back these two plans, we're looking at it internally, but then that'll spread itself out into the community and tie everything together. So this, what the airport does provide, though, is that linkage of being able to, you can manufacture your goods at an airport that has been successful in transporting those goods and getting them fast to their communities and to their customers. That's what we compete with the Chicagos and the JFKs. We've starting to master that, where we're now making that an easier access. So as we do our part in that, then communities will come a part of that, then the industries become a part of that, and then this become a holistic growth opportunity.
So, Shannetta, in that case, like, and to Jeff to some degree, you know, we do have aging warehouses down there now that were built in the early 90s, and they don't necessarily meet a modern standard. The idea of looking at changing how we use those warehouses and maybe making them become a higher and better use. Specifically in our study that Franklin County worked on, one of the things that was suggested was this concept of using the FTZ, bringing products in from all over the world that come to Central Ohio, and they're put together here and into the final product. But maybe that happens in 3D printing, for example. Maybe that happens in a space that needs not great amount of ceiling to or floor to ceiling space, but rather repurposing those buildings. And you got to imagine that someday they will have to be repurposed. And I think when Jeff talked about the Rickenbacker working group, and he said, we have to get back to that, there's a group that sort of drifted apart a little bit. And that's the tendency that happens unless you have discipline. And so it's one of the things that I think is really interesting for us, because we're going to have to bring that to the table again. But it's going to ultimately be not government moving that forward, but the private sector.
All right, so let's get that discipline started back on these questions. So, thanks. We only have one more minute of questions up here before we open it up, so I just want to get Jeff one more chance to talk. Thank you. One of the things that was really impressive that Groveport and OBETS did together was great. The Groveport Rickenbacker Employee Area Transportation Network, and they connected Dakota, and they got people to jobs. Workforce access is a big deal, getting people to work outside of the city. It's a problem, you hear about it here, but it's a national issue because people don't live where they work, right? And we're continually working to help change that. But so Jeff, tell me a little bit about what you're doing to help retain jobs down there, and tell us a little bit about what you guys are doing with the Great Shuttle and maybe a future of even a mobility hub down there.
Okay, first of all, let me say workforce is the #1 issue when it comes to sustaining the growth that we have at Rickenbacker. I can't say that long enough, loud enough, to as many people as I can possibly say, and I've been beating this drum for a long time. Since 2008, at least, I've been involved in discussions about transportation being one of the barriers to employment in the Rickenbacker area. I think part of that is not so much the access to transportation, but is a perception that the Rickenbacker area is that area of cornfields, farmland, that is so remote from the city. But we're in an economy with the lowest unemployment rates that we've seen in years, forever maybe, in this area. And we've reached a point where the people who want to be working are working. And the question is, where do we go from here? How do we turn those people who are not working into available workforce? There's a lot of barriers to employment that we've been able to identify, and transportation is probably the chief issue that creates a barrier to employment. In 2014, December of 2014, understand in the Rickenbacker area, in the warehouses, we have peak season. That's the holiday season primarily, because so many of our businesses are retail based. I had a meeting with Eddie Bauer. Understand that Eddie Bauer occupies 2.2 million square feet right in the middle of our industrial district. The loss of that company would create a 2.2 million square foot vacuum in the market. We had a meeting with the leaders at Eddie Bauer, and their comment to us was, we cannot have another peak season like we just went through. And there was an implication that if we can't do something about this, specifically related to transportation, we may have to look at other alternatives. They had spent in one weekend $7,000 for buses just to go into the downtown around the State House to pick people up who wanted to work. Took them down to Rickenbacker over the Thanksgiving holiday, which was their biggest time. So we walked out, our city administrator was with me. She turned to me and said, I can see how you're going to be spending your next year. She was very, very right. We started immediately. Over the course of the next several months, an idea and an actual program and now a department took shape, and we called it the Groveport Rickenbacker Employee Access Transit Program. The city actually invested in 4 buses, 28 passenger shuttle vehicles.
Should we tell them that it means great?
It's great.
It is great.
So many puns. We partnered with OBETS to provide service to them. Right now, the city invests about $500,000 a year in this program, and we started out on a fee basis, trying to get the employers who were screaming longest and loudest about transportation. When we had the program up and running and we started to call on these companies, we could hear crickets. They were nowhere to be found. So we tried a fare-based system, and we realized very quickly that in order for us to be efficient, we had to bite the bullet. We had to absorb these costs because we had to feed the beast that is the Rickenbacker area. So we've been very successful. Right now, we're up around 35,000 rides per year. Prior to this, CODA provided service into the Rickenbacker area, not to the frequency that they are now, but we had people that would get off the bus at the Marathon station in Groveport and walk a mile along 317 to get to jobs that were part-time, 4-hour-a-day jobs. We knew we had to do something, and this was our answer. This was our response. I've been in these discussions about transportation, like I said, since 2008. It finally just required cutting through the noise and just taking the bull by the horns and doing it by ourselves. We're very proud of what we've done. We've been very proud of the collaboration that we've been able to achieve to provide this service, and we hope to expand it. We'd like to partner with Columbus and some of the other communities, Pickaway County, Fairfield County. We know there's available workforce there. We'd still like to tap into some of the population on the north side of Columbus that's a little harder for us to reach. But what we provide is that last mile door-to-door service, which was probably the key element in the entire transportation program. In addition to the frequency of service, it was that, how do I get from here to here? And understand that when you have a 2.2 million square foot warehouse, there's a lot of ground to cover.
It is the last mile.
It is the last, well, yeah.
They are gigantic.
Yeah.
So this has been extremely important. But understand, this is probably the tip of the iceberg. There are so many other barriers to employment that we're hearing. In that meeting with Eddie Bauer, we heard childcare. One of the first lessons that we learned with our transportation program was that we have dual parents working in the Rickenbacker area. Mom would ride the bus down to take her job at second shift. Dad would get on the bus. Mom would bring the kids with her. Within the first 2 weeks of having wheels on the road, we had to buy car seats. We didn't think that would be an issue, but it's amazing how many parents work in the Rickenbacker area, and to be able to provide childcare in a convenient setting somewhere nearby where if their child is sick, they can tend to that child. Access to social services. I mean, let's face it, the jobs in the Rickenbacker area don't pay a great deal. It's getting better, but when you have a household of 4 people that is surviving on dad's income of $15,000 or $15 an hour, they still require access to social services. I'd like to be able to provide that access locally so that people can still access those services in a convenient manner. There's a lot of things that still have to happen, but transportation was the low-hanging fruit. That's what we've been able to do. We're very proud of that.
Thanks, Chef. And one last tidbit on that is that when we surveyed folks down there, my team didn't realize that people come to work every day with their luggage, pulling their luggage to work because they're homeless, and that's what they take everything they own to work in those jobs down there. And so this is the first step into our community. So it's really important that we create those opportunities so that we can continue to grow our community. So with that positive note of creating that economic engine, let's move over to the questions. Mark Barbash, you're on.
I'm Mark Barbash with the Ohio Economic Development Association. You covered what I was going to ask. I think this last piece about we really have 2 central Ohio's, one of which is phenomenally prosperous, including what's going on around Rickenbacker, and we have another group who have challenges with child care and transportation. I think it's really important that you're taking that on. So my alternative question was going to be, what do you I heard you talk about workforce. What are the biggest threats to the success of the Rickenbacker area? I hear workforce, but what else do you lose sleep overnight as you think about how do you sustain and grow the businesses in Rickenbacker and the work at the airport?
That question's for me?
For whoever the hell wants to take it.
Jim?
Don't make an ass out of yourself, Jim. Don't make it.
Just going to say,
Mark, it is a great question, and so I do have an answer. And I think one of the things that I think we need to be concerned about is making certain that as we have monoculture of warehousing as an activity, we have to diversify the number of companies who are using these assets, and we're not putting all of our eggs into one basket, for example. Because in logistics, a lot of people in this room can tell you differently, or tell you the same thing, actually, is that it's a mobile industry. And when you have a 1 million square foot warehouse and you get charged 1 cent more per square foot, that's a meaningful increase. And maybe Indianapolis isn't doing that. And so maybe your tax abatement is run out. It can be mobile. So we have to really understand that the ability to attract new business into this area is really super important, so we don't get caught on all our eggs in one basket and then they leave. It's important.
I knew you'd put your foot in your mouth, Jim, so let me just follow up. Will tax incentives, tax abatements always be necessary in order to continue the growth at Rickenbacker?
I'll let Jeff answer that one.
Thanks, Jim. We'll always give away the farm. To answer your question, yes, because it's not a level playing field. It doesn't matter what type of incentive a community is offering, they're offering an incentive, whether it's free land, free water taps, discounts on the infrastructure that's needed. There's always some type of incentive. I think that's always going to be a factor in development in order for us to compete. And that's a sales job we have to do to our community, to be able to let them know this is why we do this, and to show them the benefits. We've had pre-1994 CRAs that provided 15-year 100% abatement of real property taxes.
And that's a by right privilege, so that means you just get it.
Goes with the land. So it's hard for people to see. It's hard for the fire department to see. It's hard for the school board to see why we do this. But then these abatements start to fall off and they're non-renewable. And they're starting to see the benefits that may have started in 1995 with the first tax abatements. They're starting to see their revenue increasing. So the job has gotten a little bit easier, but when a new abatement's offered, that's still hard. I want to kind of go back, if you don't mind, Mark, if I have the time, to kind of talk about what helps sustain us. And I think there's two things I want to hit on, and one goes back to workforce and kind of the idea of perception and the efficiency of transportation into the area. Understand that people still see Rickenbacker as that remote area. And for a lot of residents of the Central Ohio area, it's still very hard to reach. I think we need to find ways to quickly and efficiently get people into the Rickenbacker area so that we start to challenge that perception of being too remote. The other thing I would say is that further cooperation and collaboration between the communities that make up Rickenbacker. We've been in discussions with Columbus for a lot of years about Groveport's next frontier. Where do we move? And most of the communities around the Rickenbacker area are contracted with the City of Columbus for water and sewer services to serve our growth areas. These discussions are probably what are going to have the most impact on Groveport, but really the region on the whole, and how successful we can be to be able to open up more land for development. So.
If I could, too, Thea, I wanted to add to the part about the challenges. So, we talk about warehouses or whatever type of industry that's there, but we have a labor shortage. We have a skilled labor shortage. So whatever that looks like and where the employees are being drawn from, be it Rickenbacker, be it any other area, we're all striving to have those same people working in our communities. So that's a big part of what will either make the airport successful or the community successful, is we've got to start training people a little differently to be able to take some of these higher end jobs that we want to provide, and then those businesses that are making those decisions. We've got to all be at the table to really, if we want change, we've got to ask for change. We've got to demand change when we're going out and negotiating and bringing new companies into the area. We have to have those real conversations about the things that we want to be able to make those changes. So.
All right, next question.
Good afternoon, I'm Kathy Fox. I noticed in the summary of the report that a number of the called out highlights feature issues about housing, and proximity of workers to all these jobs. And I haven't heard yet this afternoon much conversation about how that dynamic might be changed. I'd be very interested in hearing that.
Thanks. Actually, Jeff, you're probably in the best seat to answer that.
That's an interesting challenge for the community. As I mentioned, the available land is a challenge for us for further development, and I think the community is always going to weigh the benefits to the community as opposed to how the resources of the community are stretched. Housing, to be quite honest, housing in general isn't something that the city has ever really chased. I would say our industrial development has far outpaced our residential development, and that's why we have a golf course and a rec center and those types of things. But it is becoming an issue because I think one of the most common things we're hearing right now have to do with living where you work and getting people closer to where the jobs are. The challenge for the city is to find those areas where that can happen. And understand you've got communities that have been impacted with low-quality housing in the past, and I'm not saying this housing has to be low quality or that it would be, but that's, again, you go back to perception, and that's a perception that has to be challenged in every community. If you look around Groveport, we have a lot that we're very proud of. And our housing stock is one of those things that we've been able to do pretty well with. The question for us is, where do we take the next step into affordable housing? Where can that happen? And how do we make that happen? So it's a challenge. It's one that we've had discussions with Columbus as we've talked about our further growth and partnering with the City of Columbus. This is something we have to look at. The question is how we look at it and how we succeed.
And it's certainly a regional issue, as we're actually starting a regional housing strategy process up right now, and I'm sure that's something that we really want to get ahead of the fact that so many communities are being outpaced in the affordable housing arena. We don't want Central Ohio to be in that place, so we're looking forward to partnering with Groveport and all the communities around Central Ohio to ensure that future. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add, too, was one of the recommendations that came out of the MORPC plan was this placemaking and using transportation corridors like Rickenbacker, like Alum Creek, to start to develop that type of community where your housing, your recreation, all of your elements of quality of life are all centrally located. So that becomes a part of that conversation around placemaking and sense of place, and how that then ties to the housing conversation, because then you have all of those services that make that a reality. So.
Well, the last two times we've done a plan for the Rickenbacker area, it was just transportation, as I mentioned. I'd like to say in 10 years from now, because we looked at placemaking as part of this, that this won't look like just like kind of a collection of communities, but it will look like one place, right? One place where people work, one place where people live, and where they can enjoy themselves. So I'm excited to see that next 10 years. Next question.
Great, thank you. Hi, I'm Tom Goldsby. I'm a professor of logistics and serve as chair of the Department of Marketing and Logistics at Ohio State's Fisher College of Business. First of all, a comment. Thank you very much to the CMC for shining a bright spotlight on Rickenbacker. I don't regard it as an asset of the community. I mean, this chair, empty chair over here, is an asset. I think it's a very special, unique asset of this region. Think about it if, those of you that have traveled by plane anytime recently and you think about experiences at some of the rival airports, JFK, Miami, O'Hare, think about your experience as a passenger. Now think about the cargo. Okay, the passenger gets higher priority service than cargo every day. So think about that poor cargo. If you can come in and out of a dedicated airport, that's a tremendous benefit. So again, thank you very much for that. Now for the question. There was some reference to this 23 million square feet of covered capacity warehousing space. It strikes me that supply chains are evolving pretty rapidly, steadily and rapidly, in terms of focus on last mile, the changing consumer, and given that so many of your clients are retail or consumer goods companies, it strikes me that the complexion of that distribution capacity would very well have to change from what we might call middle mile, full pallets in, full pallets out, to being full pallets in, broken pallets, and individual units shipped out. I was just curious about how you're marketing those assets, maybe a little bit different. Are you seeing a change in complexion in prospective clients and existing clients changing the nature of their operations to adapt to that evolution?
I'd say we're seeing a difference in demand. And this is, you talk about the idea of last mile. This is a concept that is just now coming into its own for a lot of these communities. For a long time, it was building the big boxes to store the little boxes in, to ship those little boxes out the door. It's only been recently, as we start to see services like Amazon and others that are going direct to the consumer with that last mile, we're starting to see more of this. We have 2 projects underway right now. They're actually the first. No, I can't say that. They're probably the second and third last mile projects we've seen in the community, and I think that's interesting. But again, we go back to the availability of land, the availability of space to make these things happen. I think redevelopment is going to have to occur with some of our older, Jim, we were talking about that a little bit earlier, about some of the older spaces that we have that were built in the 80s and the 90s, redevelopment so that we can allow some of those types of things. That for us is some of the diversification. It still centers around logistics, but it gives us a chance to do something a little bit more. So I think it's extremely critical, and it's something that we'll be looking at closer. Will we market it? I don't know.
All right. We have one more. It has to be quick. Thanks.
Right. Last question. I'm Paul Gluck with Michael Baker International. Any thoughts on how the opportunity zones, which were passed in the tax overhaul, will affect future developments? Have you given consideration to that? I know it's recent legislation.
I didn't hear the question.
Well, I'm just going to say that I'm still holding my breath on opportunity zones. I hate to say something like that, but the truth of the matter is they are hopefully going to be able to get some purchase and be able to do some things. Rickenbacker area is, I believe, a good portion of it is in an opportunity zone, so we would be able to make use of that. Where that gets to be important is in this housing arena, possibly, where you might have an investor come in and put some money into an affordable housing project down there. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Again, I want to be optimistic about it. I'm pretty pessimistic about opportunity zones right now, but as time moves on, we'll see how they work out. But thanks for the question, though.
So with every good plan, you start the implementation process, and we are at that door. We have this group of folks, as many others, that will help us start that implementation process. So Deb, that's our story, and we're sticking to it.
That's a wrap.
And we're glad to share it with you.
Well, Jim's not. Jim might not be optimistic about opportunity zones, but I think we can all be optimistic about what's next for Rickenbacker. We hope you enjoyed today's forum. Please join me in thanking our sponsors, Columbus Regional Airport Authority, and our partners at MORPC. And let's thank our very witty speakers that were with us today: Jeff Green, Jim Schimmer, Shannetta Griffin, and Thea Walsh. Thanks for being here. We hope to see you next week.